Hi, my name is Michael Sedini, and I am the founder of Walk the Talk America, an organization built on bridging the gap between the mental health community and the firearms industry. We believe through formal education, outreach, and engagement with the mental health and firearms communities, we can reduce suicides and other negative incidents associated with firearms ownership. Our goal is to raise awareness and create a change in the misunderstanding regarding mental illness and firearms by bringing together industry leaders to reduce gun violence, negligence, suicide, and the trauma that these events create. We have developed programs for suicide prevention, firearms negligence, trauma mitigation, and child safety. It's important to eradicate the prejudice that both the mental health and firearms industries face while reducing the number of tragedies and deaths that have occurred in the U.S. due to the decline in funding for mental health outreach and education. By creating an organization that is solely focused on making change and is made up of experts from different fields, from all walks of life, that haven't been corrupted by politics, the media, or personal prejudices, we could save lives. We will always seek input opportunities to further enhance communication, compassion, calls to action, and education. One of the reasons Walk the Talk America exists is because in 2009, my friend and company president, Bill Strominger, took his life with one of my company's firearms, and we were totally blindsided by it. I don't want Bill's death to be in vain, and I don't want anyone to ever feel what we felt as a company afterwards. We have an opportunity to learn from the past and be prepared mentally for any negative outcome involving one of your company's firearms. So we are here now, today, with this video to tell you how to prepare for the unexpected. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch it, and thank you.
Hi, I'm Jake Wiskershon. When we talk about preparing for the unexpected, it seems like a little bit of a bizarre concept. How can you possibly prepare for something that's yet to arrive? But really, that's what we do whenever we train for anything, whether it's fielding a ground ball or going out to the range and practicing your defensive shooting. What we're doing is we're preparing the brain for something that has yet to arrive so that when it arrives, we are already familiar with that circumstance and we don't freeze in the moment. Now, you've probably heard of the fight, flight, or freeze, or fight or flight reflex in the brain. And what that means is that our emotional or limbic system, which is in the middle and rear part of the brain, ends up firing a bunch of chemicals, and those chemicals tell the brain to do something. If you're not prepared for what those chemicals are in the form of feelings or emotions, then what happens is your frontal lobe will get locked up and you will fail to act. Sometimes you will panic, sometimes you will do the wrong thing. So the more we can train for these things, whether it's a series of ground balls, knowing how they bounce and where your glove's going to go, or whether it's a series of defensive shooting scenarios, knowing what to do and where to go and seeking cover and that sort of thing, the more opportunities we can give our brain to prepare for things, the better off we will be when those things occur. So let's talk about trauma mitigation. Now, trauma, if we take a neurological perspective of it, is when we experience something in life that overwhelms the limbic system, which then clouds the frontal lobe, the thinking part of our brain here, into a place where we're not able to handle it. Sometimes we can have some long-lasting effects of that. We might call those post-traumatic effects. And then we get even mental health diagnoses like PTSD or acute stress disorder when those things happen and they don't go away right away. So what we want to do is we want to mentally prepare ourselves for things that could be unpleasant, that could happen in our lives, so that if and when they do, we're not stuck in these trauma situations with these trauma effects afterward. Now, the way that we do this is we have to envision these scenarios well in advance of them ever occurring. For example, most of us in the firearms community are used to taking an attitude of preparedness. So whether or not you're preparing for an electrical outage like we've had here in Reno in recent history with some storms that came through that knocked down some power lines, you want to have a generator prepared and you want to practice going and plugging in the generator and filling it with gas and turning it on and making sure all the switches and everything work and the breakers are thrown the right way. If you're preparing for something like another natural disaster where maybe water isn't around, you want to know where your water supply is at home and have access to it. So these aren't really, unpleasant or unpractical things when you're preparing for them. But what they do is when the thing happens that you're worried about happening, you already have your plan in mind because you've trained your brain to go there. And that's what our brains do. When we experience things, we build this bank of experiences that we can then draw upon later as shortcuts to deal with the matter at hand. Similarly, when we're talking about the negative consequences or negative potential outcomes of firearms, what we want to do is mentally prepare for something that may happen that hasn't happened yet. You go, well, Jake, you're a therapist. Don't you therapists tend to teach people to avoid thinking negatively about things? And I say, yes, we do. When somebody's stuck in a negative thought pattern and their life is full of misery, then we do want to train them how to think differently, to reframe, to picture things in a different, more pleasant mode or worldview, so that they're not living in this pain all the time. But what we want to do in order to avoid the trauma effects is intentionally invite those difficult scenarios into our brains. And I can tell you that some people will say, well, that sounds unpleasant. I don't want to think about the horrible thing that has yet to come, because what if it never comes? Now I've just spent time thinking about negativity when I didn't otherwise have to. And I would say that the good that outweighs that is far superior to any momentary negative experience or negative emotion that you might feel in preparation. So when we take police officers, for example, and we run them through scenarios and evaluations, they can be really intense. But the intensity of that is far worth the benefit that comes later when the police officer or the firefighter or the emergency room doctor or the EMT or the paramedic, when they encounter these situations in real life, their brains are already saying, oh, I've been here before. I'm used to this. I got through it once in training. I can get through it again. And then we avoid the trauma effects. So one of the ways that we do this is we imagine negative outcomes and we go, well, if this thing were to happen, what would I do? And then you practice this and you rehearse it. And then hopefully that thing never comes. But if it does, you've already decided that I've been here before. I've practiced this. I know what to do and how to respond. That's why we want to invite you to entertain the idea of trauma mitigation by strategically and purposefully putting yourself in situations mentally that will prepare you for the negative outcome if and when it comes. If you want to learn more about this, you can go to my website, my company's website, zephyrwellness.org, and search emotional functioning in the videos section. It'll pop up with a series of videos. You can learn about your 10 core emotions and learn how your brain processes these things so that you don't get stuck or frozen when the situation arises that you weren't prepared for. You can also learn your emotions a lot better so that you can navigate life as it occurs, and you can improve your communication and your relationships and leadership and all sorts of things. Emotional functioning and understanding it is critical to navigating life.
Rob Pincus here. I want to thank you again for taking the time to go through this teaching session, watch this video, think about these things. At Walk Talk America, we're incredibly proud of what we do. We think it's incredibly important. One of the reasons that this trauma mitigation segment, this piece of our work, is incredibly important to me lately is because this firearm has entered the market. This is the Personal Defense 10, the PD-10 from Avidity Arms, a company that I'm an owner of, along with Mike Sedini, you heard from earlier, the founder of Walk Talk America. We're bringing this gun to market, and I know that inevitably one of these guns could be involved in a negative outcome. And that's going to be potentially traumatizing to me, right? Just to know that one of these guns was used in a crime, to see a picture of one of these guns, with my logo, my corporate logo for the last 15 years, what I've got tattooed on me, see that in a crime picture, if you can imagine, next to a kid whose parents left the gun loaded, accessible to that kid. The kid didn't know how to use it. They got their hands on this gun, and now that kid's dead. And those parents are living with that tragedy. And in a way, I'm living with that. The people that work in the factory that build this gun are living with the person who works the gun counter that sold this gun. Maybe the person who's an instructor who taught somebody how to shoot, taught them how to shoot with this gun and made them think, hey, this gun's perfect for me. And they went out and bought it. And all that's great and cool from a business standpoint and for me bringing a good defensive gun to the market. But it could be potentially tragic for me as well as the people involved. So what do I want to do? Well, then I want to educate people, right? That's really the number one thing you can do. And that's what I want to talk to you about. There are all kinds of things you can do to prevent those negative outcomes involving the firearms that you're involved with, involving the people that you're involved with as part of the firearms industry. And that's incredibly important, right? So we know this can happen. You're thinking about that. Let's do the best thing we could do, which is not let those things happen. And the number one way that we prevent negative outcomes with a firearm is we prevent unauthorized access to the guns. Who's unauthorized? Well, somebody who isn't capable of understanding how to use the gun, somebody who isn't capable physically of controlling the gun, somebody who isn't mentally maybe mature or aware enough to understand the negative potential outcomes of misuse of the gun. So they don't really have that perception. Maybe their perception in general, right? Their judgment, perception, anger control. We think about dementia, we think about delusions. All of these kinds of things can affect whether or not somebody should be trusted with the responsibility of a firearm. And then, of course, there's people with malicious intent. So somebody who might steal your gun to hurt someone else. And that's a little different from that anger management issue. So what do? We control access. Even a gun like this one is designed for defensive use can be staged in a quick access safe, and very quickly and easily we can access that gun in an emergency, right? So controlling access, that's really the number one thing we do. Remembering that sometimes it's us, right? That person you're selling the gun to, or that person in your student who's the best shooter in the class, sometimes we're the ones that should not have immediate access to a gun. Well, what am I talking about? First, something really simple. If I'm using recreational drugs, including alcohol, if I'm drinking, I'm not carrying a gun. If people come over to my house for a drinking party or dinner party or wine tasting or whiskey tasting, we're locking the guns up. We're not doing show and tell. Also, you got to think about, we should think about mental health like physical health, right? And if I went downstairs to cook dinner and right now and somehow burned my hands, both hands, second-degree burns on both hands, bandaged up for a week or whatever, who knows, I can't use a gun to defend myself during that time, right? And that's a physical reality that I accept. There may be a time where I have a mental reality that I have to accept as well, right? When you talk to people maybe who are getting older about guns in the home, or someone's getting a gun for their parents who are living alone or moving into the country or whatever they're going to do. Well, does that person drive? Are they aware? Are they alert? Do they worry about them with dementia or Alzheimer's, things like that? Because if they do, if the person isn't driving, they probably shouldn't have access to a gun, right? If they can't control their judgment or their motor skills well enough to drive a car and to be responsible outside of the home, outside of supervised care, then they probably shouldn't have that gun to defend themselves, right? If they perceive that that person is a threat and it's really not, that tragedy, again, it can trace back to us as a community, and maybe we would perceive some effect of that personally too. I know I would, right? If I'm not advising people as best I can, if I'm not trying to educate people as best I can about how to use the gun, when to use the gun, how to prevent unauthorized access, and when to separate themselves from the gun, then I'm going to feel potentially like responsible, right? So I'm going to do everything I can ahead of time to avoid these negative outcomes, and I would encourage you to do the same. Ultimately, yeah, it takes the bad guy to steal the gun from your house and to hurt some innocent person. It takes the negligent parent to leave the loaded gun in the presence of the kid, but I'm not going to stand up proudly and pound on the table and say freedom isn't safe, shall not be infringed. That's on those parents, right? If I can influence those parents and I can say, hey, get the quick access safe, or get something like a locking module on your AR grip, like from Advon here. But if you can do something to influence those people to be more responsible and reduce the chances of the negative outcome that could come back and affect your emotion and your stability, maybe your job, right? Then you should do that. I think it's incredibly important. It's maybe the best outcome from this video is that you never have to deal with the emotional side of this, because you've been incredibly proactive to just generally prevent the death, the injury, the suicide, any of the crimes that could be committed with a firearm that you sold, that you made, or that you trained someone to own, and then they didn't meet their responsibility while exercising their rights.
Thank you for watching this video. We really appreciate the opportunity to bring this important subject to your attention, and we hope that you gain some perspective on the topic. Just like cars, it's a given that some firearms will be used in ways that have negative outcomes in life. Although the majority of guns used in positive ways will exceed the negative instances, it's important to stay prepared for anything that could affect your mental health in the future. For more information about our organization, Guns and Mental Health, please visit WTTA.org or find us on social media at WalkTheTalkUS. Thank you.